Welcome, dear listeners, to her revenge arc. I am your narrator, and tonight, I invite you to settle in, to dim the lights, and to listen. The story we are about to journey through is one of quiet spaces, and the loud betrayals that can shatter them. It is a story about a love so pure it could not be spoken in human words, and a reckoning so precise it could only be delivered through a melody. This is a tale of what is stolen, what is reclaimed, and the undeniable truth that some bonds cannot be broken by lies or by force. This is my story. It begins, as so many important things do, not with the man but with a cat. And not just any cat. It begins with Jasper. Before there was a we or an us that needed to be fractured, there was just me, Alara, and the small, quiet world I had built for myself within the four walls of my third-floor apartment. It was a world scented with old books and brewing chamomile tea. A world where the loudest sound was often the turning of a page, or the gentle hum of the city breathing 3 stories below. I had curated my solitude with the same care a gardener tends to a delicate orchid. It was not loneliness, it was a sanctuary. Into this sanctuary Jasper arrived not as a choice, but as a necessity. I found him during a thunderstorm that had seemed to want to tear the sky in two. He was a scrap of a thing, a ball of matted gray fur huddled beneath a dripping fire escape, shivering so violently I could see it from my window. His fear was a palpable thing. A tangible presence in the rain-soaked air. Something in his desperate, silent plea for invisibility resonated with a part of my own history I kept locked away. Getting him to trust me was a slow, deliberate process, a testament to patience. For the first 2 days he lived behind my overflowing bookshelf, a pair of luminous green eyes tracking my every move. I didn't try to force him out. I simply lived my life around his fear. I placed a small bowl of water and some warm chicken near the edge of the shelf. I spoke to him in low, soothing tones, not about him, but about the book I was reading, or the weather, or the color of the evening sky. I wanted my voice to become part of the safe background noise of his new world, as unremarkable and as constant as the ticking of the clock on the wall. On the 3rd day he emerged. He moved like a ghost, a silent gray shadow slinking along the baseboards, still wary, still prepared to bolt. But he was out. That night, as I sat on the floor reading, he approached. He didn't touch me. He simply sat about 5 feet away and watched, his tail giving a slow, uncertain twitch. And so began our ritual. The true breakthrough, the moment our two solitary worlds truly merged, came through sound. Not my voice exactly, but something more fundamental. I noticed he was terrified of loud, sharp noises, a dropped pan, a car backfiring on the street, the shrill ring of the telephone. But he was drawn to soft, repetitive, melodic sounds. The gentle thrumming of my fingers on a wooden table, the low hum I would make when I was concentrating on a particularly difficult passage in a book. One evening, trying to soothe him after a nearby siren sent him scrambling, I began to hum. It was a simple 3-note melody, almost a lullaby, that came from nowhere. I repeated it over and over. Then I added a soft clicking sound with my tongue, a sound like gentle rain. Then a quiet, breathy whistle, the kind that barely makes a noise. Hum hum hum. Click click. Whoosh. His ears, which had been pinned back in fear, slowly swiveled forward. His body, tense as a drawn bowstring, began to relax. I kept it going, a quiet, private concert for an audience of one. After a few minutes, he took a hesitant step toward me. Then another. I didn't move a muscle. I just continued my strange little song. Hum hum hum. Click click. Whoosh. He crept forward until he was right beside my leg. He sniffed my hand, and then, with the trust that felt as sacred as any vow, he rested his head upon it and began to purr. That became our language. It was our secret handshake, our I love you, our it's okay. It was the sound of safety, of home. I would perform it when he was anxious, when he was happy, or sometimes just because. He would always respond either by coming to me, or by giving a specific contented chirp that was reserved only for those moments. It was a melody woven from the threads of his trauma and my patience. It belonged to us and to us alone. For 2 years this was our life. A quiet symphony of two. My world was small, but it was whole. It was filled with the comfortable weight of a cat sleeping on my chest, the soft pat of his paws on the wooden floor, and the sacred silent understanding that passed between us. I believed it was all I needed. I had my sanctuary and I had my Jasper. I had forgotten, or perhaps I had never learned, that even the most well-fortified sanctuary can have a door. And that sometimes you open it willingly, never suspecting that the person you let inside is not looking for shelter, but for something to conquer. Then I met Leo. Leo entered my life the way a sudden burst of sunlight enters a dusty room, illuminating everything, making it all seem brighter, newer, more alive. We met at a small, independent bookstore, the kind I frequented. I was reaching for a worn copy of a book on celestial cartography, and so was he. Our hands brushed. It was a scene so perfectly cinematic, so charmingly cliché, that it felt scripted. He was handsome, not in a stark, intimidating way, but in a warm, accessible one. He had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, and a smile that seemed to suggest he was perpetually on the verge of sharing a delightful secret. He was a lawyer, but he spoke of it as if it were a slightly boring day job that funded his real passions: vintage maps, hiking, and he claimed a deep appreciation for quiet, thoughtful people. He was, in every conceivable way, my opposite. Where I was content with the familiar, he craved novelty. Where I found solace in silence, he thrived on conversation. He saw my quiet world not as a limitation, but as a curiosity, a fascinating, undiscovered country he wanted to explore. And I, who had been the sole cartographer of my own life for so long, found myself flattered by his interest. I was a quiet shore and he was a tide, and for the first time in a long time I wanted to see what he might wash up. Our first few dates were a blur of thoughtful gestures and easy laughter. He took me to a planetarium because I'd mentioned the cartography book. He brought me a rare first edition of a poetry collection I'd once said I admired. He never pushed, never crowded. He seemed to understand my need for space, for a slow unfurling. He listened, truly listened, with an intensity that made me feel like the most interesting person in the world. He was patient, charming, and seemed to possess an almost preternatural understanding of the things I held dear. The first time he came to my apartment, I was nervous. My space was an extension of myself, and letting him in felt more intimate than any physical touch. He stood in the doorway for a moment, taking it all in: the teetering stacks of books, the mismatched furniture, the thriving jungle of houseplants. "It's exactly as I imagined it," he said, and his smile was so genuine, so full of warmth, that the knot of anxiety in my stomach loosened. "It's a haven. It's you." And then he saw Jasper. Jasper, who was usually wary of strangers, was surprisingly calm. He sat on the arm of the sofa, watching Leo with an unblinking, analytical gaze. Leo didn't rush toward him or try to pet him. He simply gave a slow, deliberate blink, the sign of trust in the feline world. "Who's this handsome fellow?" he asked, his voice soft. "That's Jasper," I said, my heart swelling with a strange mix of pride and apprehension. "He's magnificent," Leo said, and he meant it. He spent the next 10 minutes talking to Jasper, not to me, telling him about his own childhood dog, asking him his opinions on the current state of politics in a low, playful murmur. He was winning me over by winning over the most important creature in my life. It was a strategy of such brilliant simplicity that I didn't even recognize it as a strategy at all. I just saw a kind man being gentle with my cat. In those early months, Leo's relationship with Jasper was a source of profound joy for me. He never tried to supplant my role. He respected it. He would buy Jasper the most expensive organic cat food, only to laugh when Jasper would turn his nose up at it in favor of his usual cheaper brand. He bought him a plush, velvet bed that Jasper resolutely ignored, preferring the worn cardboard box I'd kept for him since he was a kitten. Leo took it all in stride, shaking his head with a fond smile and saying, "He's your boy through and through. He knows who his number one is." He seemed to understand the sacredness of our bond. He even witnessed our secret song once. I was in the kitchen, and Jasper had been startled by a car alarm. He was hiding under the table, trembling. I knelt down and began the soft ritual. Hum hum hum. Click click. Whoosh. Leo had walked in silently, and he stood in the doorway watching. I didn't notice him until Jasper, soothed and calm, had padded out and was rubbing against my ankles. I looked up, embarrassed, my cheeks flushing. It's a stupid thing we do, I stammered. Leo didn't laugh. His expression was one of intense fascination, almost awe. Don't ever call that stupid, he said, his voice low and serious. That was incredible. It's like you two have your own private language. I felt seen. I felt understood in a way I hadn't realized I was craving. He hadn't just accepted my eccentricities. He had elevated them. He had taken the quiet, strange little world of me and Jasper and declared it a place of wonder. And that, right there, was the masterstroke. He didn't try to change me. He celebrated me. He didn't try to invade my sanctuary. He asked for a key, and with a heart full of misplaced gratitude, I gave it to him. I dismantled my own defenses brick by brick, because I believed I had finally found someone who loved my fortress for what it was. I didn't understand that he wasn't interested in living in the fortress with me. He was interested in owning it. The tide had not come to visit the shore. It had come to claim it, to reshape it in its own image, one grain of sand at a time. The erosion was so slow, so gradual that I didn't even feel myself slipping away. The shift was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, like the slow change in the quality of light as afternoon fades into evening. You don't notice it happening moment by moment, but suddenly you find yourself in the dark. Leo's initial celebration of my world began to morph into a gentle, persistent campaign of improvements. Started with my apartment, my haven. I love how cozy this is, Alara, he'd say, running a hand over my worn velvet armchair. But don't you think a more modern piece would really open up the space? I saw a fantastic minimalist sofa that would look incredible against this wall. He'd say it with such enthusiasm, such a genuine desire to help, that my quiet "no, I liked my chair" felt churlish and ungrateful. So I'd demur, and he'd drop it, but the seed of doubt was planted. Was my taste cozy or just cluttered? Was my sanctuary a haven or a hovel? Then it was my clothes. I've always favored soft, comfortable fabrics, muted colors, things I could curl up in. He'd look at me, his head tilted with that same affectionate smile, and say, "You have such a beautiful figure, honey. It's a shame to hide it under all those layers. You should wear something that shows you off. Like that red dress we saw in the boutique window." Again, it wasn't a command, it was a suggestion wrapped in a compliment. But the underlying message was clear. The way you are is fine, but you could be better. You could be more. You could be more like something I would choose. The erosion continued, seeping into every corner of my life. My friends, a small tight-knit group of fellow quiet souls, were deemed nice but a little dull. My love for spending a Friday night with a book and a pot of tea was sweet, but a bit isolating. He was always encouraging me to be more, to do more, to want more. He was a sculptor, and I was his block of clay, and he was slowly, patiently chipping away at all the parts of me that were uniquely mine, convinced he was revealing a masterpiece hidden within. And through it all there was Jasper. Leo's relationship with Jasper began to change, too. The respectful distance was replaced by a kind of proprietary affection. He started calling him our cat. He'd post pictures of Jasper on his social media with captions like, "Hanging with my best bud," or "the king of our castle." My friends and family, who only saw this curated version of Leo, adored him. "He loves your cat so much," they'd gush. "You're so lucky, Alara." He began to try and insert himself into our rituals. He'd see me starting our quiet song and he would try to join in, his hum a little too loud, his whistle a little too sharp. Jasper would simply stop responding and walk away. The melody was a delicate, precise combination of sounds, a lock for which only I had the key. Leo's attempts were like a stranger trying to force the wrong key into the mechanism. It didn't work. Instead of accepting this, a flicker of something I couldn't name would cross his face, a brief, tight-lipped annoyance. He'd cover it quickly with a laugh. "Guess I don't have the magic touch," he'd say, shrugging. "He's a one-woman cat, that's for sure." It sounded like a compliment, but it felt like a complaint. It felt like he'd discovered one part of my world, one corner of my fortress, that he couldn't conquer, and it bothered him. The first real argument we had was about Jasper. I had a severe flu, the kind that leaves you weak and aching in every limb. I was asleep on the sofa and Jasper was curled up on my chest, a warm, purring weight of comfort. Leo came in from work and wanted to go out to a dinner with his colleagues that he'd forgotten to mention. "Come on, Alara, you'll feel better if you get out of the house," he urged, his voice laced with an impatience I was starting to recognize. "I can't, Leo. I feel awful." I croaked, my throat raw. "I just want to sleep." He sighed, a gust of theatrical frustration. "Fine. I'll go alone. But you can't just lie there all evening. At least move to the bed. It's not good for you to be on the sofa." He reached down to nudge me, but his real target was Jasper. He tried to lift the cat off my chest. Jasper, startled from sleep and sensing my own feverish agitation, did something he had never done to anyone before. He hissed, a low guttural sound of warning. Leo recoiled as if he'd been burned. "Jesus, Alara. Your cat just hissed at me." "He was just startled, Leo. Please just let us be," I whispered, my head throbbing. "No, this is part of the problem," he said, his voice rising. "You let him get away with anything. You treat him like a person. He's a cat, Alara. An animal. You're so codependent on him, it's not healthy." The words hit me like a physical blow. Codependent. Unhealthy. He was using the language of therapy to pathologize the purest, most uncomplicated love in my life. He was taking the one thing that was entirely mine and reframing it as a flaw, a weakness. "He is not a flaw," I said, my voice shaking with a sudden cold anger. "He is my family." "And what am I?" he shot back, his handsome face twisted with a victimhood that seemed utterly out of place. "I try to help you, to make your life better, and you push me away for a cat." That was the moment the first major crack appeared in the facade. I saw for a fleeting second the real mechanism at work. It wasn't about my health or the sofa or even about his dinner plans. It was a power struggle. And Jasper, a small gray cat who had survived a thunderstorm, was the symbol of my independence. The one part of me he couldn't control. And he hated it. We smoothed it over, of course. He apologized profusely the next day, bringing me flowers and soup. He said he was stressed from work, that he didn't mean it, that he loved me and he loved Jasper. And because I wanted to believe it, because the alternative was too terrifying to contemplate, I accepted his apology. I let him plaster over the crack. But I never forgot the chill of his words. I never forgot the look on his face when Jasper chose me. I had been given a glimpse of the man behind the mask, the tide beneath the charming surface. It was a cold, possessive current. And I was beginning to realize that it wasn't trying to lift me up. It was trying to pull me under. The end did not come with a bang, but with the slow, suffocating squeeze. The arguments became more frequent, and their subject matter became more pointedly focused on me, my personality, my very essence. My quiet nature was no longer thoughtful but withdrawn and antisocial. My need for solitude was no longer independent, but a fear of intimacy. He was an expert at twisting my strengths into weaknesses, using the language of concern as a weapon. "I just worry about you, Alara," he would say, his brow furrowed with performative care. "You're cutting yourself off from the world. You need to be more engaged, more present." His definition of present always seemed to involve being present at his work functions with his friends in his world. My world, the one he had once claimed to find so fascinating, was now treated as a problem to be solved. He was no longer a visitor to my sanctuary. He was its warden, and he found the inmate wanting. The final conversation happened on a Tuesday. It was raining outside, a soft gray drizzle that mirrored the feeling inside our apartment, an apartment that now felt more like his than mine, with its minimalist throw pillows and the abstract art he'd insisted on buying. I was sitting in my old armchair, the one piece of myself I had refused to replace, reading a book. Jasper was asleep on my lap. It was a perfect portrait of the before, a tiny pocket of resistance. Leo came and stood over me, blocking the light from the lamp. He had that look on his face, the one that meant a lecture was coming. "We need to talk," he said. I sighed, not looking up from my book. "What is it, Leo?" "It's this. he said, gesturing vaguely at me, the book, the cat. This whole situation. It's not working. What situation? I asked, my voice flat. You're not trying, Alara, he said, and the sense of injustice in his tone was staggering. I have given you everything. I have tried to pull you out of your shell, to show you a bigger life. And you just retreat further and further into it. You prefer this. He gestured at Jasper again with a barely concealed sneer. To me. To a real life. I finally looked up at him. The charming mask was gone. In its place was a cold, hard resentment. He looked at me not with love or even frustration, but with the disappointment of a craftsman whose materials have proven defective. And in that moment, I felt a strange and sudden clarity. It was like a fever breaking. The fog of his influence, of his constant low-grade gaslighting, simply evaporated. I wasn't defective. I wasn't a project. I was a person. And he didn't love me. He loved the idea of fixing me. And he had failed. You're right, I said, my voice startlingly calm. It's not working. He seemed taken aback by my easy agreement. He had been gearing up for a fight, for tears, for me to beg. My placid acceptance threw him off his script. So that's it? He asked, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. You're just giving up? No, I said, stroking Jasper's soft fur. The cat rumbled, a deep, contented purr. I'm not giving up. I'm letting go. Kropka. The rest was a cold, quiet administrative task. He packed his things with a sullen, wounded air, as if he were the one being wronged. He made a few final parting shots about how I would regret this, how I was choosing loneliness, how I was throwing away the best thing that had ever happened to me. I didn't respond. I just sat in my chair holding my cat and waited for him to leave. When the door finally clicked shut behind him, the silence that descended was not empty. It was full. It was the sound of my own breath, of the rain on the windowpane, of Jasper's purring. It was the sound of my sanctuary being reclaimed. I felt a profound, bone-deep relief. I had survived the tide. The shore was mine again. He took his clothes, his toothbrush, his minimalist art. I spent the next day purging my apartment of the last remnants of him, the throw pillows, the fancy coffee machine I never used, the scent of his expensive cologne that lingered in the air. I opened all the windows, letting the fresh, rain-washed air circulate, a symbolic cleansing. By evening, the apartment felt like mine again. Felt like home. I went to bed that night feeling lighter than I had in months. I fell asleep with Jasper curled in his usual spot, tucked into the crook of my arm. The next morning, he was gone. The realization dawned slowly. A cold, creeping dread that started in my stomach and spread through my limbs, leaving them numb. First, it was just a simple observation. Jasper wasn't on the bed when I woke up. This was not unusual. He was an early riser. I called his name, expecting to hear the familiar soft patting of his paws on the floor. Silence. Jasper. I called again, louder this time, sitting up. The silence that answered was different. It was a dead, hollow silence. The kind of silence that signifies an absence. I got out of bed and began to search. I checked all his usual sleeping spots. The cardboard box, the patch of sun by the window, the top of the bookshelf. Nothing. I checked behind the sofa, under the bed. The dread was a physical thing now, a tight band around my chest. I saw that the food and water bowls were still full from the night before. Untouched. Jasper never missed a meal. Never. Panic began to set in, sharp and frantic. I checked the windows. All closed and locked. I checked the front door. Locked. There was no way he could have gotten out on his own. He was an indoor cat. The world outside my apartment terrified him. He would never leave willingly. And then a new thought, colder and more horrifying than any other, inserted itself into my mind. Leo still had a key. I had been so focused on reclaiming my emotional space that I had forgotten the simple physical reality of the key. I had meant to ask for it back. I had forgotten. I stumbled to my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed his number. It rang once, twice, 3 times before going to voicemail. His voice, so full of practiced warmth, filled my ear. Hi, you've reached Leo. I can't take your call right now. I hung up and sent a text, my words a jumble of panic. Leo, where's Jasper? Is he with you? Please tell me you didn't take him. Minutes stretched into an eternity. My frantic pacing wore a path in my small living room. I called him again. Voicemail. And again. Voicemail. Finally, a reply buzzed on my phone. A text message. My heart hammered against my ribs as I read it. I don't know what you're talking about, Alara. I haven't seen him. Maybe he finally got tired of being cooped up in that apartment and ran away. You should be more careful. The cruelty of it, the casual, dismissive gaslighting, stole the air from my lungs. He was lying. I knew it with the certainty that was absolute and soul-crushing. He had used his key. He had come into my home while I slept, into my sanctuary, and he had stolen a piece of my heart. He hadn't taken a cat. He had taken Jasper. He had taken our language, our history, our bond. He had taken the living, breathing symbol of my resilience. It wasn't about wanting the cat. It was about taking him from me. It was punishment. It was a final brutal act of control, a way to ensure that even in his absence he could still cause me pain. It was a way of saying, if I cannot have your world, I will destroy it. I will take the one thing you love more than me, and I will make it mine. I sank to the floor, the phone clattering from my numb fingers. The silence of the apartment was no longer peaceful. It was a screaming void. He had taken the purr. He had taken the warmth. He had taken my song. And in that moment, the quiet, contemplative woman who had built a sanctuary of solitude was gone. In her place was a woman who had just had a war declared on her. And she knew with a chilling newfound clarity that she would not be the one to surrender. The first 48 hours were a fugue state of grief and impotent rage. I moved through my silent apartment like a ghost, my own home now feeling alien and hostile. Every corner held a memory of him, a phantom shape of gray fur. The patch of sun by the window was just a patch of sun. The cardboard box was just an empty box. The silence was a physical weight, pressing down on me, suffocating me. I did all the rational things one is supposed to do. I called Leo's number until he blocked me. I sent him long, pleading emails that went unanswered. I then sent him angry, demanding emails that also went unanswered. I contacted our mutual friends, my voice trembling with the desperation I couldn't conceal. Have you spoken to Leo? Have you seen Jasper? The responses were a masterclass in his insidious influence. Oh, Alara, I'm so sorry to hear you two broke up, one friend said, her voice dripping with pity. Leo mentioned he was worried about the cat. He said Jasper seemed really unhappy and that he was thinking of taking him to his parents' place in the country for a while, where he could have more space to run around. Another friend told me. Leo sounded so heartbroken. He said you two had a big fight over the cat's welfare, and he just wanted what was best for him. He had preemptively poisoned the well. He had painted a picture of himself as the concerned, caring pet owner, and me as the unstable, neglectful ex-girlfriend. He had stolen my cat and in the same stroke stolen the narrative, reframing his theft as a rescue. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it left me speechless. He wasn't just a thief. He was an artist of manipulation, and this was his magnum opus. I considered calling the police. I spent an entire morning with my hand hovering over the phone, rehearsing what I would say. Hello? My ex-boyfriend has stolen my cat. I could already hear the weary sigh on the other end of the line. It would be dismissed as a messy domestic dispute, he said, she said situation with no easy proof. And Leo would have proof. He would have pictures of himself with Jasper all over his social media. He would have receipts for the expensive food and the velvet bed he'd bought. He could probably even get his parents to lie for him, to say they had agreed to take the cat in. He was a lawyer. He knew how to build a case. I, on the other hand, had what? A story about a secret song? They would think I was insane. The very thing that made my bond with Jasper so special, its privacy, its intimacy, was the very thing that made it impossible to prove in a court of law or to a skeptical police officer. Despair was the thick, syrupy thing slowing my thoughts, weighing down my limbs. I stopped eating. I stopped sleeping. I would just sit in my armchair, the one he hated, and stare at the empty space where Jasper's box should be. I was back in the thunderstorm, only this time I was the one huddled and shivering, and there was no one to coax me out. It was on the third night, lost in that dark hollow place, that it happened. I was humming. I didn't even realize I was doing it at first. It was an unconscious habit, a nervous tic born of grief. I was humming the first few notes of our song. Hum hum hum. The sound was thin and weak in the empty room. Felt like a profanity. How could I make that sound when he wasn't here to hear it? I stopped abruptly, a fresh wave of pain washing over me. But then another thought followed. A tiny spark in the overwhelming darkness. Leo knew about the song. He had seen it. He had called it incredible. But he didn't understand it. He thought it was a trick I had taught the cat, a clever party piece. He had no concept of the depth of it, of the fact that it was woven into the very fabric of Jasper's sense of safety and identity. He saw the performance, but he had never understood the language. He had stolen the cat, but he did not possess the key to his soul. The spark flickered, then grew into a tiny steady flame. He had built his case on lies and public perception. He had used social media, friends, and plausible deniability to construct a reality where he was the hero. He had chosen a public stage for his narrative. Very well. I would choose a public stage for my truth. A new kind of energy began to flow through me, cold and clear and sharp. The grief was still there, a hard knot in my chest, but it was now overlaid with a powerful clarifying purpose. The passive, quiet Alara who curated her solitude was gone, perhaps for good. The woman who remained was a strategist. My mind, which for days had been a swamp of despair, was suddenly a razor-sharp instrument. I would not fight him on his terms. I would not use angry words or futile legal threats. He was a master of that game. I would only lose. Instead, I would use my weapon, the one thing in the world that was mine and Jasper's alone, the one piece of evidence that could not be forged, faked, or argued away. My plan began to form, not as a desperate gamble, but as a meticulous step-by-step campaign. First, I needed information. I unblocked his number from a cheap burner phone I bought for cash. I couldn't call him, but I could now see his social media profiles, which he had, foolishly, not set to private. I became an archaeologist of his life, digging through the layers of his curated happiness. There were pictures of him at fancy dinners, at charity galas, and then I saw it. A picture of Jasper looking deeply unhappy and stressed, sitting on a pristine cream-colored sofa. The caption read, "My little guy is finally settling into his new country home. So much better for him than that cramped city apartment." The picture was geotagged. Leo's parents' estate in a wealthy suburb about an hour north of the city. A quick search of his mother's name on the same social media platform brought me to her profile. She was a prolific poster. And there, pinned to the top of her page, was a digital invitation. "You are cordially invited to our annual summer garden party, a celebration of community, charity, and family." It was in 10 days. The stage was set. It was perfect. It wasn't just a family gathering. It was a celebration of community. There would be dozens of people there, his colleagues, his parents' friends, pillars of their local society. The very people whose opinions he valued most. The very people he had lied to. He had built his reputation on a foundation of charm and respectability. I was going to demolish it in front of a live audience. Second, I needed to prepare. I spent the next 9 days in a state of focused, almost monk-like discipline. I gathered my own evidence, not for the police, but for the court of public opinion. I printed out high-quality, poster-sized photos of me and Jasper from the day I brought him home scrawny and terrified, to recent pictures of him healthy and happy, asleep on my lap. I collected all his vet bills, with my name and address clearly listed as the owner. I found his original adoption papers from the shelter I'd volunteered at, which listed me as his sole guardian. I put them all in a neat portfolio. This was my ammunition, to be used only after the main event, to silence any lingering doubters. But the most important preparation was internal. I had to be calm. I could not show up looking like a hysterical, vengeful ex. That would play right into his narrative. I had to be serene, confident, almost beatific. My grief had to be channeled not into anger, but into an unshakable, quiet certainty. I practiced my expression in the mirror. Not smiling, not frowning. Just the look of calm resolve. I chose my outfit with the care of a general choosing his battle armor. A simple, elegant, navy blue linen dress. Conservative, respectable, unimpeachable. I wanted to look like someone who belonged, not someone who was crashing a party. During those 9 days, I barely spoke to anyone. I was saving my voice, my energy, my focus for the performance to come. My apartment was no longer a place of grief. It was a war room. The target was identified. The weapon was chosen. The strategy was in place. Leo thought he had one. He thought he had taken the last piece of me that mattered and that I would simply crumble. He had underestimated me. He had mistaken my quietness for weakness, my solitude for fragility. He had never truly seen me at all. He had no idea that the quietest people often have the most formidable resolve. He had stolen my cat, and in doing so, he had awakened a part of me I didn't even know existed. He was about to find out that a woman fighting for a love that pure is the most dangerous adversary of all. He was about to be introduced to the real Alara, and the introduction would be public. The day of the garden party arrived wrapped in a perfect mocking blue sky. The sun was bright. The air was warm with the scent of cut grass and blooming roses. It was the kind of day Leo would have called flawless. The kind of day that felt like an advertisement for the life he was so desperate to project. I drove the hour to the suburbs in a state of preternatural calm. My hands were steady on the wheel, my heart beat even. The grief and rage had been transmuted into something else, something cold and heavy and powerful, like a sphere of polished granite in the pit of my stomach. This was not about revenge, I told myself, not in the hot, messy way people imagine it. This was about restoration. This was about realigning the universe to its correct state, a state in which Jasper was with me. The directions led me to a long, winding driveway flanked by ancient oak trees. It opened onto a sprawling, manicured lawn that sloped down from a large, stately brick house. White tents were set up on the grass, and a string quartet was playing something by Vivaldi. There were at least 100 people milling about, holding champagne flutes, their laughter tinkling in the warm air. It was a perfect portrait of casual wealth and established society. It was Leo's natural habitat. I parked my modest car down the street, out of sight, and walked up the driveway. I carried nothing but a small plain clutch that held my keys, my phone, and the portfolio of documents. As I approached the edge of the lawn, I felt 100 pairs of eyes flicker towards me. I was an unknown variable in their carefully controlled social equation. I saw Leo's mother, a woman with a helmet of perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a strange socialite smile, notice me. A brief flash of confusion, then annoyance, crossed her face before she smoothed it back into a mask of polite inquiry. I didn't wait for her to intercept me. My eyes scanned the crowd, searching, and then I saw him. Leo was standing near the center of the largest tent, holding court. He was wearing a crisp linen suit, a glass of champagne in one hand, the other resting on the shoulder of a pretty, doe-eyed young woman who was looking up at him with pure adoration. He was laughing, the sound carrying across the lawn. He looked like the lord of the manor, utterly at ease, utterly in control. And then I saw Jasper. He was in the lap of the adoring young woman. My heart constricted so painfully it felt like a physical blow. It was him, my Jasper. But he looked wrong. His fur, which I always kept so sleek and brushed, was slightly unkempt. His posture was tense, his ears were flat against his head, and his eyes were wide, darting back and forth, taking in the crowd, the music, the noise. He looked overwhelmed and terrified. He was enduring it, but he was not happy. He was a prop, a living, breathing accessory to Leo's performance of the sensitive, animal-loving man. The sight of his distress burned away the last of my nerves. The granite in my stomach solidified. It was time. I began to walk towards them. I moved slowly, deliberately, my posture erect, my expression serene. I was not a storm front, but a slow, inevitable change in barometric pressure. People turned to watch me, conversations faltered. The string quartet seemed to hesitate for a beat. Leo saw me. His smile froze, then vanished. The color drained from his face. For a single beautiful moment, I saw pure undiluted panic in his eyes. It was the look of a king who has just seen a ghost walk into his throne room. The young woman, whose name I would later learn was Clara, looked from his face to mine, her expression one of innocent confusion. He recovered quickly, his social mask snapping back into place, but the effort was visible. He excused himself from his circle and strode towards me, his movements tight and angry, intercepting me before I could reach the tent. "Ilara," he hissed, his voice a low, furious whisper. "What in God's name are you doing here? You need to leave. Now." I stopped and looked at him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I spoke calmly, my voice just loud enough for the people nearest to us to hear. "Hello, Leo. I'm not here to cause a scene. I'm here for my cat." "He is not your cat," he shot back, his eyes darting around to see who was listening. "We've been over this. He's happy here. He's thriving. Look at him." He gestured vaguely back towards the tent. "I am looking at him," I said, my voice still even, still calm. "And I see a terrified animal being used as a party accessory. I'm going to ask you one more time politely. Let me take him home." "You're delusional," he spat, grabbing my arm. "You're embarrassing yourself. Security will be here in a minute." This was the moment. The physical contact. I didn't pull away. I simply looked down at his hand on my arm, and then back up at his face. "Don't touch me," I said. The words were quiet, but they had the force of a command. He dropped his hand as if he'd been shocked. The people around us were now openly staring. Conversations had stopped. The string quartet had fallen silent. We were the center of a silent, sun-drenched stage. Leo's mother was now hurrying towards us, her face a mask of fury. "Leo, what is going on? Who is this?" she demanded. "It's no one, Mother," Leo said, his voice strained. "A misunderstanding. She's just leaving." "I am Ilara," I said, turning to his mother and offering a small, polite nod. "And I am Jasper's owner. Your son took him from my apartment after we broke up." Leo's mother scoffed. "That's a ridiculous accusation. Leo would never do such a thing. He rescued that poor animal from you. He told us how neglected he was." The lie, so bald-faced and cruel, hung in the air between us. I could see the sympathetic, pitying looks on the faces of the bystanders. They believed her. They believed the story Leo had so carefully crafted. It was working. This was the moment of truth. Arguing would be pointless. Pleading would be pathetic. I had to change the rules of the game entirely. I took a deep, calming breath. I turned away from Leo and his mother, ignoring their sputtering indignation. I took 5 steps towards the tent where Clara sat, still holding my terrified cat. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. I didn't speak to her. I didn't look at her. My focus was entirely on the small gray creature in her lap. I found a quiet spot on the grass about 15 feet away from them and I knelt down. The navy blue dress settled around me. I closed my eyes for a second, picturing him as a tiny shivering kitten, and me humming in the dark. I was drawing from the deepest well of our shared history. Then I began. It started with the hum. Hum hum hum. It was quiet, barely audible above the gentle breeze. It was not a performance for the crowd. It was a call to an audience of one. On Clara's lap, Jasper's ears twitched. They swiveled in my direction like tiny radar dishes. His head, which had been pressed down into her arm, lifted. I continued to the next part of the sequence. The soft clicking sound I made with my tongue. Click click. It was the sound of safety, of comfort, of home. Jasper's whole body tensed. He was no longer a passive, terrified prop. He was alert. He was listening. His green eyes, wide with anxiety just moments before, now narrowed with intense focus. He was looking directly at me. Leo's voice cut through the air. "What are you doing? Stop that." He started to move towards me, but his father, a stern-looking man who had been watching from the porch, put a hand on his arm, his expression unreadable. I ignored them all. The world had shrunk to me, the cat, and the sound that bound us together. I added the final element. The soft, breathy whistle. Whoosh. The sound of a gentle promise. The completion of the code. Hum hum hum. Click click. Whoosh. And it happened. It was instantaneous. It was undeniable. It was magic. Jasper launched himself from Clara's lap. He didn't hesitate. He didn't look back. He hit the grass and sprinted. His little legs pumped, a gray streak across the perfect green lawn. The 100 guests, the string quartet, Leo, his parents, the adoring new girlfriend, they all vanished from his world. There was only the sound and the source of the sound. He ran directly to me, a desperate straight line of pure instinctual love. He crashed into my chest with a small chirping meow, the meow I hadn't heard in 2 weeks, the meow reserved only for our song. He scrambled up my dress, hooking his claws gently into the fabric, and buried his face in the crook of my neck, his whole body trembling, not with fear, but with a relief so profound it was almost violent. And then he began to purr. It was a loud, rumbling, full-body purr that vibrated through my entire being. It was the sound of a key turning in a lock. It was the sound of home. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him tight, burying my face in his soft fur, inhaling his scent. For a moment, I let the world disappear. It was just the two of us again, reunited in our sanctuary of sound. When I finally looked up, the silence on the lawn was absolute. It was a stunned, gaping silence. Every single person was staring at us, their mouths slightly agape. They had just witnessed something intimate and irrefutable. They had heard a language they did not understand, but they had seen the translation with their own eyes. I looked at Clara. Her face was a canvas of shock and dawning horror. Her hands were still held out in the shape of a cat that was no longer there. She was looking at Leo, and for the first time she was not looking at him with adoration. She was looking at him with the chilling clarity of someone who has just realized they have been told a terrible lie. I looked at Leo's mother. Her face, so full of haughty certainty just moments before, was now pale and slack. Her socialite's mask had shattered. Embarrassment and confusion warred in her eyes. And then I looked at Leo. He was frozen, a statue of disbelief. The color had not returned to his face. He looked from me and Jasper, wrapped in our private reunion, to the 100 pairs of eyes now fixed on him. Eyes that were no longer admiring. They were questioning. They were judging. I had not screamed or cried or accused. I had simply told the truth in a language he could not speak, and in doing so, I had stripped him of all his power. I had dismantled his entire narrative of care and concern with 3 simple sounds. He was exposed not as a hero but as a petty, cruel thief. The lord of the manor had been revealed as a fraud in his own court. I rose to my feet slowly, never loosening my hold on Jasper. He clung to me, a warm, purring weight of absolute trust. I walked calmly towards the driveway. I did not run. I did not hurry. I held my head high. As I passed Leo, I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. I could feel his humiliation radiating off him like heat. I did, however, pause in front of his father, the stern-looking man who had stopped Leo from interfering. He looked at me, then at the cat purring in my arms, and then back at me. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was not an apology. It was an acknowledgement, a concession, a verdict. I didn't say a word. I simply turned and continued my slow, dignified exit. I walked down the long driveway, past the oak trees, past the white tents and the silent, staring guests. The only sound was the crunch of my shoes on the gravel and the steady, rumbling purr of the cat in my arms. I had walked in as the ghost. I was walking out as the queen, carrying my kingdom with me. The car ride home was the blur of silent, joyful tears. I drove with one hand on the wheel, the other stroking Jasper, who had refused to get off my lap. He was kneading my leg with his paws, purring without pause, occasionally stopping to butt his head against my chin. It was a frenetic, desperate outpouring of affection, as if he were trying to make up for 2 weeks of lost time all at once. I kept whispering his name, over and over, my voice thick with emotion. The hard granite sphere of purpose in my stomach had dissolved, replaced by a warm liquid feeling of profound relief. When we got back to the apartment, it was as if the color had returned to a black and white film. The silence was gone, replaced by the familiar sounds of home. The soft thud as he jumped onto the sofa. The rattle of his favorite toy mouse. The contented crunching as he finally devoured a bowl of his favorite food. The apartment was no longer a tomb. It was our sanctuary once more. He followed me from room to room, never letting me get more than a few feet away, a small gray shadow of devotion. That night, for the first time in 2 weeks, I slept. It was a deep, dreamless, healing sleep, with the familiar, comforting weight of Jasper curled up on my chest, his purr a steady, rhythmic lullaby against my heart. We were whole again. I never heard from Leo directly again, but the fallout from the garden party, I learned, was spectacular. Clara, the doe-eyed girlfriend, broke up with him that very evening. One of my dull friends, who had a cousin who was at the party, gave me the full report. The story of the crazy ex-girlfriend and the magical cat song had become the stuff of local legend. Leo's carefully constructed image as the charming, respectable lawyer had been irreparably damaged. He was no longer seen as the golden boy, but as something cruel and a little bit pathetic. He had tried to play a game of public perception, and he had lost in the most public way imaginable. His humiliation was, by all accounts, total. A week later, a package arrived for me. A small, unassuming cardboard box. Inside was the key to my apartment. There was no note, no apology, just the key. It was a silent, sullen admission of defeat. I took the key, walked outside, and dropped it down a storm drain. A final satisfying punctuation mark on that chapter of my life. In the months that followed, I found myself changing. The experience had not broken me. It had forged me into something stronger. The quiet, timid Alara who allowed her world to be slowly eroded by a charismatic manipulator was gone. In her place was a woman who understood her own worth. A woman who knew the difference between quietness and silence, between solitude and loneliness. I reclaimed my life with a newfound sense of ownership. I filled my apartment with more books, more plants, more of the things that brought me joy. I reconnected with my friends who had been worried sick about me, and I cherished their steady, undramatic affection. My sanctuary was still my sanctuary, but its walls were no longer made of fear and retreat. They were made of self-awareness and strength. I had faced the worst of someone's casual cruelty and had not only survived, but had triumphed, not through anger or vengeance, but through the quiet, unshakable power of a love that was pure and true. Jasper, if it was possible, became even more attached to me. Our bond, tested by fire, was now unbreakable. Our secret song became even more sacred, a reminder of what we had overcome together. Sometimes, as I would perform the ritual hum hum hum, click click, whoosh, and he would come running, I would think about Leo. I didn't feel anger anymore or even pity. I felt a kind of detached curiosity. He had tried to steal something he could never understand. He saw a cat, an object, a possession to be one. He never saw the living, breathing embodiment of a bond forged in fear and patience. He tried to claim a kingdom, not realizing the crown could only be worn by one who knew the anthem. My story is not one of a grand, fiery battle. It is a story of quiet power, of a truth so fundamental it needs no shouting. It is a reminder that the most profound connections we have are often the ones that exist without words, in the silent, sacred spaces we build with those we love. He took my cat, but in doing so, he gave me back myself. And that is a price I believe he is still paying to this day. And now I turn the story over to you, my dear listeners. Have you ever had a connection with a person or an animal that felt like its own secret language? A bond so deep that it transcended words and could not be faked or broken by outsiders. Share your stories in the comments below. I would love to read them. Thank you for joining me here at Her Revenge Arc. If this story resonated with you, please consider giving it a like, sharing it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribing for more tales of justice, reclamation, and the indomitable strength of the human heart. Until next time, be well and be true to your own song.